This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 393 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam. With me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we are still vacationing under the sunny skies of Dakota, but as seems to be a recurring theme on our show as it goes on over the years, is that we are running low on new episodes of Static Shock to talk about. However, we do have a couple different ways we like to revisit previous episodes we've reviewed, and we're excited to sort of debut a new version of that, a new format for revisiting some episodes of Static this very week.
That's right, Liam. We are debuting the new format, which we are dubbing a Omnibus this week of Static Shock Season 1. So this is the inaugural Omnibus episode, Omnibus format, and the first Omnibus is going to be on Static Shock Season 1. So what we're going to do is take a look back at the entire season. We're going to go through each and every episode. We're going to talk a little bit about each episode, talk about what we scored it, and then maybe once we're wrapped up here with kind of reviewing that, really settle down on what were maybe the or a few of the most impactful moments from the season, and ultimately maybe what our favorite episode was from the season. So looking forward to talking about that with you today. We have a ton of stuff to get through here, obviously, with 13 entire episodes to cover. So let's not waste any time, shall we, as we kick off the inaugural Omnibus episode here on the DCAU Review.
That's right, Cal. So we will kick off the Static Season 1 Omnibus, which is brought to you by buymeacoffee.com/DCAU Review. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but we'll get right to the action here. And yeah, we can start talking about a little bit the origins, obviously, of the series. We, based on the Milestone character, who is just called, and that's important for the show and the comic character, his name is Static, not Static Shock. Static Shock's the name of the show. The character's name is Static. That's an important distinction. So it's a good actually.
Yes. It's often a confusing bit. No one ever calls him Static Shock in the show. They only refer to him as Static. But as you mentioned, because the show was called Static Shock, people believe, oh, well, Static must be his first name and Shock is his last name. Kind of like when people think like Christ is Jesus's last name. So, it's right. The same thing. Shock must be Static. No, it's the name of the television show. It's not his actual last name. It's not a two-part name. His superhero name is Static, and that's it.
Absolutely. So just with that out of the way, I want to give a shout out to, of course, Static's original comic book creators, Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, Christopher Priest, Michael Davis, and Derek T. Dingle. And yes, as they adapted it into animation, it started with a bang, literally, as we get the first episode of the series entitled A Shock to the System, which we go back. We actually start with Static taking down some bad guys, maybe making you think that we're going to get right to the action. But then we get our flashback. We get the secrets of Virgil's past and how he came to be, as we're introduced to young Virgil Hawkins, a pretty average teen at Dakota High School. However, he is kind of smack dab in the middle of what appears to be a brewing gang war, as two different gangs are recruiting kids at his high school. And wouldn't you know it, his bully Francis, aka F-Stop, happens to be on the opposing side of that gang war, and meanwhile, Static is recruited to join up in this big final. Apparently, there's going to be like a gang fight to end all gang fights down at the docks, and unfortunately, for Virgil and for the rest of the folks who were preparing to throw down on the docks, that's when we get what is referred to throughout the series as the Big Bang. As a SWAT team, that the only SWAT team that could perhaps give the Gotham City SWAT team a run for its money and incompetence, the Dakota SWAT team opens fire, dropping munitions into a crowd, which mixes with some Edwin Alva Industries chemicals, creating this giant cloud of purple smoke. And wouldn't you know it, a bunch of villains, but more importantly, our main hero is born in this here episode.
Yeah, that's right. We get the birth of Static, who wakes up the next morning. By the way, he narrowly avoids getting involved directly in this gang war. He has a gun that's handed to him. He's basically told to pick a side.
Mhm.
He nearly gets into it with who will eventually become Hot Streak later on in a fist fight before the police intervene. So Static was in the wrong place at the right time, I feel like, in his origin story here. But we learn very quickly. He
Mhm.
wakes up the next day. He's got his blanket is clinging to him. He's able to power on his dad's razor without even plugging it in, and he suddenly realizes that the exposure to this gas has given him a new lease on life, a new set of powers here. So we see that Virgil realizes that his powers specifically revolve around electrical currents, obviously manipulating electricity. So really anything, as we will learn throughout the series, they play fast and loose with what that exactly entails. But generally speaking, he manipulates electricity and things that are metal, obviously, that he can sort of cling to. So he and Richie, whom he lets in on the secret, kind of discover what they're going to do, or sorry, discuss what they're going to do and figure out how he's going to use these powers. They go through a set of different costumes and eventually land on what ultimately is Static's costume. Not before, of course, trying on a costume that looks a little bit like Black Vulcan from Super Friends costume.
Mhm.
But this is the birth of our Static Shock in this episode here, as Static realizes that perhaps with great power comes great responsibility, or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a little postscript of Static bringing some of these ill-gotten goods that the I believe that the criminals at the beginning of the episode were trying to steal back to the school, and even flirts a little bit with Frida, who Virgil is his classmate Frida, who Virgil himself is quite inept at speaking to in such a smooth way. But he's starting to develop or realize very quickly that Static has a certain swagger to him that perhaps Virgil does not. Of course, we're also introduced to really all of the big supporting characters in this episode: his sister Sharon, his father Robert, and of course his best friend Richie Foley, who, as you mentioned, is part of the costuming montage and becomes kind of for the first season here, he's kind of Static's guy in the chair, his one friend or confidant that knows that Virgil and Static are one and the same. And so, as it seems like it's a new lease on life for Virgil, we cut back to the hospital at the end of that first episode and see that old Francis, that 36-year-old man that was for some reason in high school with Virgil and Richie. Old Francis, that's not really a good name for him anymore. He's going to be going by Hot Streak going forward, as he breaks out of the hospital and goes on to wreak havoc. So that's sort of it ends with a little bit of a cliffhanger as we end the first ever episode of Static Shock. And yeah, what an auspicious debut for our hero and several of his supporting cast.
Yeah, this episode originally aired here in the US on September 23rd, 2000, and we actually covered it. Our first Static review came all the way on episode 71 of the podcast, so well into our run, but way back there if you're looking from where we are now, some 320 episodes ago. Our scores. Let's take a look at that. I was a little shocked at the disparity in our scorecard here. I didn't remember not liking this episode as much as I didn't. I'm not quite sure why I didn't. I mean, I do, because I gave visuals a very low score. I gave it a 14 out of 40. You
Phew.
gave it a 21 out of 40. That's in bad territory. I think because this is DCAU and you go from we had been doing Batman and Superman pretty much alone, maybe Batman Beyond by that point,
Mm-hmm.
and a little not quite a little bit of Justice League probably. So it's very obvious when you're watching this show that they did not have the budget nor the same artists nor the same art style as the DCAU because it was not originally intended to be a part of the DCAU. It was a standalone cartoon series, so much so that there's a throwaway line in one of these episodes that was eventually edited out about talking about Superman and Clark Kent being the same person. So
Mm-hmm.
very famously. So yeah, I think maybe in retrospect, I was probably a little too hard on this. It's not like we're not watching a, something that's MS Paint or something like that.
Right.
Although I guess when you compare it to, it's not Flash animation here. It's not on the level, obviously, of some of the DCAU stuff, and certainly not on what we end up seeing later on in the season. So I think probably an unfair judgment at that time by me. I also went back and listened to it, and some of the music is weirdly not static. It's like I think probably because it was the pilot episode. They hadn't quite found
Mm-hmm.
what they were going for with everything thus far, but it is a little light on the action also because it's they're trying to give you the origin story. But yeah,
Right.
14 and 21.
Phew.
Not great scores, but certainly a pretty big disparity when it comes to our our scores. Maybe one of the biggest of the entire run of our podcast.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, even 21 sounds pretty low. So yeah, I do remember us, I think, just being so struck, maybe because we were thinking of the later seasons where they did sort of, you know, line it up a bit more with the DCAU, the Timverse style, as it's sometimes known. And it's such a flat, stark difference. And even the way the show is colored is very different. It's very one sort of flat colored as opposed to you're not really getting the shading and some of the things we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like maybe it's such a different animal, especially this first season. I think even by season 2 they had started to tweak things a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe it was such a stark difference. We talk about that a lot. I think maybe the first 100 or so episodes we did about maybe not having our radars, so to speak, calibrated as well as maybe we would think we do now. So we never change our scores, but yeah, I would suffice to say that was a little bit shocking for me as well to see how low we were, but especially yourself on that one. But despite that, it's obviously a very important episode, and as mentioned, the ending of that first episode bleeds right into part 2, aptly titled Aftershock. And that episode picks up right where things left off with the former Francis / F Stop, now going by Hot Streak, wreaking havoc all over the place. Virgil is a little bit overmatched. Clearly, it's kind of restarts the dynamic that we saw in the first episode where, Francis is just the big bad bully. He's always harassing Virgil, and now he's got these powers that are able to match Static, and so it almost feels like it's the cycle repeating itself. Will Hot Streak be the bully to Static the way that Francis was to Virgil? And so as Virgil and Static try to overcome that side of things, the sort of emotional stakes of the episode, we also learn a little bit more about what exactly that gas was on the docks that sprayed all over everyone, as we learned that it was somehow involved the evil Edwin Alva, who becomes kind of one of the principal antagonists of these early seasons, the evil businessman here in the city, the Lex Luthor of Dakota, so to speak. Along with, apparently he's in bed with the mayor, so to speak, and has and they were responsible for the gas being stored down at the docks that night. And so it becomes this race for Static to both take down Alva, try to prove that Alva was somehow involved with this, and also take down Francis / Hot Streak. And he gets the job done as far as finally standing up to his bully and taking down Hot Streak. But unfortunately, wouldn't you know it, the disc with all of the evidence that he procures by breaking into Alva Industries is destroyed in the melee. And so Edwin Alva lives to fight another day. But at least Hot Streak is going behind bars, and we'll never hear from him again, right?
Yeah, I'm sure if the prison system in or the institutions in Dakota or anything like those in Gotham and Metropolis, yeah, they'll be doing a fine job of they'll lock him up and throw away the key, never see him again. Yeah, but this
Sorry.
episode is as you mentioned a good follow up. Now, it took us a while to actually review this episode here on the pod. We didn't take a look at it. So I mentioned the pilot we reviewed on episode 71, but unlike the Batman shows, we jump around with Static. We didn't kind of, we have a little bit more freedom to review those in the order that we wanted to, going from season to season. So it took us all the way to episode 136 to review this episode. And based on our scores here, you would think we were watching a completely different show than what we watched from the pilot, at least for me, as my score nearly doubled or more than doubled. I ended up with a score of 29 for this episode. You weren't quite as high on this one. Again, quite a 6 point difference here. You can tell we were divided pretty early here on these episodes. These early episodes of Static. You gave it a 23 out of 40. This one also is notable because we get the coined name Bang Babies, which obviously is going to be a big part of the series. That's what we're going to refer to our victims of the Edwin Alva gas here. But yeah, this one's a fun one because I think we do get to see some interaction between Static and obviously someone that, as we jokingly we're just joking about, would in fact come back several different times to interact with Static in various different ways. So yeah, I think this one is an important one because we finally do get to see Static utilizing his powers in a really meaningful way. It's a little bit more on the action side, and we get a little bit of investigation as we see Static trying to, put the pieces together as to what these chemicals were, how they always, how they affected him, and then of course his rivalry that will continue here with Hot Streak throughout the entire series.
Absolutely, Colin. That would lead us to episode 3 of season 1, that being entitled The Breed. Another huge episode, as the backdrop of it sees Derek Barnett, one of the more popular jocks at Virgil's high school, looking for a little bit of help. And of course, Virgil, being the upstanding and intelligent man that he is tasked with tutoring poor Derek. Although it's clear that maybe Derek is hiding something, and that thing is turning into a big energy monster known as Destruct. And Virgil, of course, wants to help poor Derek / Destruct out, try to find a way for him to get back to normal. Although, of course, as soon as the citizens and the police see a giant energy monster, understandably so, they're a little bit taken aback by that. And as Derek goes on the run, he runs afoul of, what do you call these? The mean kids of Static Shock, the recurring one of the bad boy metahuman gang, that being called the meta breed, led by Ebon, who really is, if there is one big bad in this series, at least as far as, on a power level wise, it's probably him. And then of course he's also along with Talon, the flying girl who can shriek, and also a guy named Shiv who's just got a few screws loose, and also he could turn his hands into knives. So what a trio! And of course they're trying to recruit Derek, and it's almost puts Virgil, I think, in the same place that he was back in the pilot, where we see Derek sort of being put in the middle, where of course Static and Virgil are doing their best to help him, whereas Ebon is sort of making the pitch that now that he has these powers and everybody's afraid of him anyway, that he should just turn to the life of crime and join Ebon's meta breed, of course letting Ebon call all the shots. And so this is kind of our first a bad guy group, a bad guy team up forming, as we see that Ebon is kind of the top of the food chain when it comes to our evil Bang Babies.
Yeah, and we get to see Static clash with multiple villains at the same time in this episode, as you mentioned, the meta breed, and the entire time he's working on trying to influence and turn Destruct, Derek back to the light side, so to speak. You know, trying to get him to realize that he doesn't need to live this life of crime. It seems to be working, but then it appears that Static is overtaken by them. The meta breed seems to have won, but of course it turns out that Static, in fact, had been able to escape with Destruct using an old subway car in this subway car battle underground. And then once the meta breed pursue them, Static and Derek work together to fight off the meta breed. And then we have a little bit of a happy ending here as we see that Derek ends up being a volunteer to be tested and figure out what research can be conducted on the Bang babies and maybe finding a cure for them. So the good news is that, you know, we see Static in this episode show a side that we'll kind of continue to see and kind of defines the character, I feel like, for him, which is he does tend to see the good in people, and he continually tries to help Bang babies realize that they don't have to use their powers for evil. They have another option. At least the ones that seemingly are in this kind of gray area where they feel like that's the only role that they have to play. So it's a good character study for Static, and something that we'll see recurring there. We reviewed this episode, the third episode of the series, which originally debuted on October the 10th, 2000. We reviewed this one on episode 138 of the podcast. Again, as far as Static episodes, especially these early seasons, I would say this is one of our stronger scores. I ended up with a 27 out of 40, and you gave it a 26 out of 40. So, you know, we're going up. We only had up to go, I feel like, from that first episode. But you know, we had a peak on episode the second episode. I really liked that one. You're gradually moving up here. You went from a 21 to 23 to now a 26. So I'm hanging in that 27 to 29 area there. So yeah, we can see that the stories are starting, I feel like, to kind of counterbalance maybe us not loving the animation or not loving the style of animation that's used for these early seasons. When you have some really good storytelling and you have character development and you start to kind of put these things in here that define the character, Static specifically, it stands out. It makes it. That's why we do these scorecards. That's why we tried to settle on this format for doing our reviews, because if you just were to look at this episode, you might go, man, that's an ugly looking, you know, compared to the other series, that's an ugly looking cartoon. But if you look at it with the plot in mind and say, you know what, this is a really good story, or this has some really redeeming aspects to it, that kind of changes your perspective there. So yeah, I love that our scores are going up from here. So I'll be interested to see if we continue with our next episode, Grounded.
Absolutely. And yeah, this episode, or as we've affectionately dubbed it, the Scooby-Doo episode of Static Shock, which involves a couple of important moments, seminal moments for us. One, it's our first appearance of your friend and mine, Carmen Dillo. Sometimes we've talked about this. Sometimes the Bang Baby gas gives you like an ironic power based on your personality. Like, you know, Francis is a hothead, so he got fire powers, and
right.
You know, Ebon's he's a dark, brooding guy, and he turned into a shadow man. And then sometimes it just makes you an animal. And in this case, it turned poor Carmendillo into he's just a man-sized armadillo in shorts. And boy, do we love him.
I was going to say, it turned him into the coolest villain in Static's Rogues Gallery, the best part of the show.
Absolutely. No arguments there. But yes, in the midst of chasing down Carmendillo, some Bang Baby gas it interacts with some sort of amoeba sample. And so the rest of the episode becomes Virgil, Richie, and some of the other kids, and of course the janitor, to complete the Scooby-Dooification of it, are locked inside the school, and they're running around from room to room being chased by a giant amoeba. who doesn't really have any sentience beyond just oozing around, and so Virgil is finally able to transform into Static and stop it, but it's a very silly episode, but one that we had a lot of fun with reviewing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the fun quotient for this episode is pretty high from what I remember. Yeah, there's like a subplot where Frida is mad because they cut funding to the school newspaper, so she's sneaking around trying to like print an unauthorized edition of the school newspaper, which is great. That causes them to get locked into the school at night, and then there's this whole thing where you feel like that somehow the janitor, because it's so Scooby-Doo, you feel like the janitor is going to turn out to be somehow behind everything, and it turns out he's not. He's just a janitor at the end. But it's very, very fun. There's a lot of them running around trying to avoid this giant green blob, and then ultimately they have to get some chemicals, and this might be one of the only times we see Static essentially eliminate a threat completely on screen. He gets some chemicals that cause it to shrink down, and assuming it dies. And then everybody's happy at the end because they print an unauthorized version of the school newspaper with details all about the amoeba's takedown by Static, and so yeah, all is well at Dakota High School at that point. So yeah, it is a fun episode to say the least. Our scores for this episode, which we reviewed on episode 184 of the podcast, I ended up with 26 out of 40. You ended up with 25 out of 40. So I feel like we're 4 episodes in here, we're kind of leveling off. We've come to a steady scoring here of what these episodes are. They're right in that kind of middle ground, like a C minus, maybe a D plus looking episode. But again, comparing it to where we started, I feel like this is a great improvement. So, yeah, I think this one is memorable for the things that we mentioned, and some fun times here for a really silly, goofy episode.
Absolutely, it's just a delight. One of our, I think, certainly one of the most fun episodes of the season, just for how clear it is as an homage, as we said, to those old Hanna-Barbera Scooby-Doo cartoons. So quite a bit of fun was had there. And then we moved on to episode 5 of the first season, and that episode being called They're Playing My Song. And this one's pretty straightforward in the sense that there's a rapper on the scene named Ice Pack, and there's a metahuman after him. And as we get to find out, that metahuman is none other than the debuting Adam Evans, aka Rubber Band Man, who is quite furious at Ice Pick. And at first, you might just think that it's just sour grapes, that Ice Pack has become a big star, and Adam's rap career didn't go well. But then we find out, of course, that Ice Pack actually stole his hit song from Adam before Adam turned into a Bang Baby. And so, of course, that puts him at odds with Static. And it's an interesting episode because it kind of starts delving into this, like, I feel like it's our first, like, morally gray, where our villains to this point in the series have been a bit more like black and white, mustache twirling almost. And then we have this guy who was wronged in the Rubber Band Man, and obviously comes back and quite a few times in the series, as we'll talk about. But yeah, this is the debut, and it's like, well, he's not wrong to be upset about this, but of course he's also going about it by putting on a purple jumpsuit and trying to destroy the guy, and that's maybe not a good way to solve your problems. So that puts him into the line of into Static's crosshairs, and I believe the subplot of that episode involves Virgil getting a job at the local burger chain, the McDonald's-esque stand-in Burgerful. And so there's quite a bit of the B story of that episode, mostly just being the comedic ways in which Virgil is shirking his new job, which I believe he only got so he could afford the Ice Pack CD in the first place. in order to go deal with Static. So suffice to say, he's not a great burger flipper, but he does save the day and put Rubber Band Man down for now in this episode at least. So small victories.
Yeah, this is, as you mentioned, this is the episode that I think you start to see some of the influence from the DCAU, even though we're not quite there yet. You mentioned it. Once your villains start getting the shades of gray, where there's at least some sort of relatability or understanding in their motives. They're not just a crazy lunatic like the Joker that is out for chaos. This one is somebody who's bent on revenge and has an axe to grind. And when you look at it from a bird's eye view, you're like, man, they kind of have a point here, especially with Adam getting his essentially he's getting played for his talent, by this producer who's using his Adam's talent to make money off of him and he's not getting any of the fame or the glory. So the fact that he's upset about this and that this stuff is being stolen from him and he feels like he should be the one that's getting the all of the accolades and all of the money and everything that comes with it, and the fact that somebody else stole this from him, he's justified in that. He maybe not so far as to going to try and kill kill the producer and kill the guy that they're propping up, but yeah, I do like that this is where we start to see some of that influence come in here, where we get our villains that are there's more dimension to the villains, I think is what I'm trying to say ultimately here. But well, this is an episode that debuted originally in the US on November the 11th, 2000. And we reviewed this one on episode 136. We actually did a double feature. Aftershock and They're Playing My Song were both on 136. But we really liked this episode too. So far, the highest ranking from season 1 goes to They're Playing My Song. I ranked it a 29 out of 40. You gave it a 31 out of 40. So we cracked the 30 mark here with this episode. So I think that says a lot about this character of Rubber Band Man, who obviously is a recurring character that does have a bit of a redemption arc, but we start here where he is just a straight up villain. And I think there's just a lot that happens in this episode that really defines it as a kind of a turning point or a stake in the ground of like, hey, these stories are going to be more than just your typical Saturday morning cartoon fare. We're going to include some of those those themes and that way of storytelling that made the stories from Batman and Superman and Batman Beyond so memorable.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely, like you said, a little bit of a shift in the types of stories you can tell, which I think is why Static is so special to people. Is that, yes, we'll certainly delve with that later this season. There's social issues, there's social commentary, and there's some depth here that maybe you weren't getting out of your average Saturday morning cartoon. So that's a great example of that. And when next we met Static in episode 6, entitled The New Kid, we see that Virgil's been doing so well at school that he's actually invited to participate in a 6-week seminar in a school for gifted youngsters. No, not that one. But yes, it's here that he meets not only the nefarious Specs and Trapper, the two sort of uber nerd recurring antagonists, the science. They're the type of science nerds that are annoying about it, and therefore they're the villains. They're mean, they're smart, but they're mean, and therefore they are, of course, the villains. But more importantly, perhaps, we are also introduced to the character of Daisy, who becomes one of Virgil's good friends for the rest of the series. But we see this sort of Virgil trying to get the lay of the land and prove he belongs with the smart kids at this school, this Van Moore Institute, while also Static is dealing with these strange robots, which are seemingly going after him, attacking him, trying to absorb his energy. And he's quite overmatched by some of them. Of course, as the time goes on, we get the big reveal that the school is actually run by none other than Edwin Alva, and we find out that the robots are being built by the nefarious Specs and Trapper, who are, of course, looking for or trying to track and capture Static at the behest of Alva. And of course, Virgil and Daisy discover this, and they're in trouble, but Virgil's able to get away and transform back into Static and take it out. And he actually, because he can't destroy the final robot because they've wrapped it in a special solution, what else do you do? He just makes it follow him all the way to Edwin Alva's house and goes crashing through the window and basically holds Alva hostage so that the robot can't attack him. And meanwhile, back at the school, Daisy is able to disconnect everything and take down the robot from the inside as well. So, and then we get our little epilogue. All's well that ends well. Static victorious over Alva, Specs, and Trapper. And as Virgil returns to Dakota High a week or so later, we see that Daisy, having not exactly been a fan of finding out that Edwin Alva and these two crazy mad scientists were working at her school, has decided to transfer to Dakota High. So quite a win for Static. He gets one over on Alva, and he makes a new good friend, or maybe more than a friend, as we see as the series progresses in old Daisy. So another big episode as far as introducing some recurring antagonists, and also introducing Daisy, who becomes kind of one of the signature school friend supporting cast of the series.
Yeah, we covered this one on episode 161 of the podcast. I did not mention, but this episode originally aired here in the United States on November the 18th, 2000. So yeah, this is interesting because, as you mentioned, we have a couple of recurring characters here, some supporting character with obviously Daisy, who ultimately becomes a love interest for Static. Spoiler alert, later on in the series, but not spoiling too much because he's very clearly a bit enamored with her in this episode. And as you mentioned, she helps defeat the villain, so that probably endeared her a little bit more to Static than we were expecting there. But yes, so as far as this episode is concerned, you and I both seem to really enjoy this one. I really enjoyed this one based on my score. I gave it a 33 out of 40. You gave it a 29 out of 40. So this is an interesting one. Like I feel like, again, we have multiple things kind of moving here. We have the reveal that Alva is kind of set up as the shadowy figure behind the scenes here, and is ultimately going to be doing anything he can to try and foil Static. This is early on. He doesn't have quite the motivation that he has towards the end of the season, but he definitely has an axe to grind with Static, who seems to be constantly foiling his plans here. So this one is just the first in a long line of examples of things that Alva will be kind of involved with here. So I think that was some of the stuff that we liked about that. I think the animation for this episode was also pretty strong from my recollection. And these characters of Specs and Trapper, who are voiced by two very familiar voice actors in Patton Oswalt and Michael Rosenbaum. They're an outstanding duo that just play off of each other very well. They have some good chemistry, it seems, in their voice acting here. So I remember us enjoying that as well. So unsurprisingly, I think we gave it a pretty strong score here. I don't know that I would have remembered that I gave it as high a score there, but it is a pretty pivotal episode for multiple different reasons there, and it's got a pretty good plot to it. So a good one here, nearly halfway through.
Absolutely. And before we get to the second half of season 1, we will just remind the folks, Cal, that this episode and every episode we do is brought to you by buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, which happens to be the best way to support the podcast.
It sure is. And if you want to support the podcast, we invite you to head on over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. Check out the ways to support the podcast. You can become a one-time supporter of the podcast. Send us a coffee. You want to hook us up with a cup of Joe just for loving the podcast? You like the Omnibus format? You got an idea for an Omnibus? The great thing about the Omnibus format, by the way, we can do this for almost almost anything. We can do it for characters. We can do it for storylines. We can do it for particular themes. We can do it for seasons. We have many different ways that we can go with this. So if you have an idea for an omnibus, you want to pass it our way, why don't you buy us a coffee, and that'll be your way of communicating it to us. Become a one-time supporter, buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, or if you'd like to, you can become a monthly supporter of the podcast. Hey, not only do you get the opportunity to send us one of those ideas, you get some perks in return for it. No matter the level, there's 3 of them, but no matter the level that you support us at, you get some really great perks. But the top perk tier, the Super Friend tier, gets you the exclusive opportunity to submit a question. And if we pick your question, we'll read it here on the air. And yeah. How cool would that be? You get to select or give us an idea for an omnibus episode, and then we do the omnibus episode, and you ask a question and you hear it on the air. That must be somebody's dream come true. But regardless, we invite you, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, and please consider supporting our little podcast today. So we'll pick things up, Liam, with the next episode, which is the episode Child's Play. And Child's Play revolves around a Freeman Community Center man starting things off here, urging passersby to repent of their sins. And then all of a sudden, the water fountain turns red. What's going on here? Something biblical, perhaps? But no, we just determined that the water fountain's been changed to cherry soda. Not wine, not blood, nothing biblical happening here at all. It turns out that we have a young man named Aaron who is recently released from a reform school, is hanging around, and not only is our fountains turning red full of cherry soda, but it's snowing vanilla ice cream, and there's lots of odd things that are happening at this point. So Dwayne, it turns out all of this stuff, of course, is happening because Dwayne is conjuring it up. But we learn that Aaron is really pulling the strings behind Dwayne, convincing him to do all of this stuff. He's manipulating him. It all culminates at this gigantic fight at the Dakota Mall, where ultimately there's this loco Martian thing, caterpillar alien that is part of like the video game that shows up and is wreaking havoc at the mall. So Static has to take care of that and some of these other things that have been conjured up. But ultimately, Static is able to defeat them. He's able to arrest Aaron, or they're able to arrest Aaron, take him down, and convinces Dwayne to do the right thing and quit making these illusions appear and come to life. Dwayne is a bit conflicted. Obviously, he cares about Aaron and wants to continue to support him, but is obviously getting all of this feedback from Static, making sure that this is the right thing to do. So at this point, that gives Static enough leverage to take out Aaron, and the police arrive in time. And then we learn a little bit more at this point that through the appeal that Static was making to Dwayne to try and get him to stop using these powers for evil, he pointed to some of the impact that he was having, or he had, at the community center. So this allows Virgil to go back or Static to go back to the community center to let Robert know the impact that he had on him. So there's a little bit of a moment there where Static, wearing his mask, obviously as Static, not as Virgil, gets the opportunity to encourage Robert in the work that he's doing, that we see at the beginning is kind of overwhelming to him and at times feels like he's not really making an impact. So through this, we see that Virgil is able to continue to encourage his dad to keep up the good work here in the community for these kids. So yeah, this is an interesting one, Liam.
Yeah, it's again just one of those things where as the series goes on, the Bang Baby Gas can do anything. So this one, it isn't even like, he's just magic. He can just turn anything into anything. So he's sometimes the Bang Baby makes you magic, and sometimes, I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about like certain X-Men characters where it's supposed to be like this innate ability and there's the scientific explanation for how it's happening, but somehow one person can make things come to life and other people are frogmen, like it just doesn't always add up. So that's what it kind of feels like with this episode. Like there is, to your point, there's kind of a nice undercurrent of of what Robert's role is in the community, and him sort of saving Dwayne from maybe the helping to provide a place for kids like Dwayne who really need a positive role model. So there's definitely some good stuff and a good message in there. But yeah, kind of just a preposterous episode, as you said, where Static's fighting giant toy dinosaurs and weird like plant monsters and things all over the episode. It's definitely a visually fun episode for sure.
Yeah, that's why episode 208 was our review of that one. You can check that out in the archives. I gave it a 30 out of 40, so something went right there. Again, we're cracking 30 with that. You gave it a little bit lower, 25 out of 40, so didn't like it as much as I did. But I think some of the fun with the visuals was what led the way with that. I think also some of the heartwarming stuff. I feel like we have a weakness, or maybe not a weakness, but maybe an appreciation for the interaction that Static gets to have with his dad. Anytime that there's this ability for in either direction for them to connect, for them to bond, for them to share moments like this that are important to their relationship. I think I don't know. For me, it's very heartwarming, and I appreciate the fact that Static has such a cool relationship with his dad. Ultimately, Mr. Hawkins, Robert, doesn't realize that Static is Virgil yet, obviously, so he's getting this encouragement from his son, but he just thinks it's the local superhero encouraging him. But of course, it's a fun little secret for us beyond the fourth wall that know that Virgil is the one actually encouraging his dad to keep up the good work. So, yeah, that's a fun little wrinkle there. So, yeah, we both enjoyed that episode. So that leads us to our next episode, Liam. We are more than halfway through the season at this point, and this one is one of the more memorable episodes, I feel like, of maybe all four seasons for a couple different reasons. This is, as you mentioned, Static was set apart a little bit different than some of the other series in a way where they were able to have, or intentionally designed to have, some social commentary and really delve into some things that are real and affect Black Americans in ways that maybe weren't addressed in some of the other cartoons, or weren't typically addressed at all in any Saturday morning cartoon. And we really see it on display here with this next episode, Sons of the Fathers. So this, of course, is the episode where we really delve into Richie and Virgil's friendship. We notice very early on, Sharon makes a comment about how Richie always comes over to Virgil's house, but Virgil never spends any time at Richie's house. There's a little bit of some awkward tension there as to why that may be. So rather than address it, Richie decides to invite Virgil over. This causes this very odd, uncomfortable interaction between Virgil and Richie's dad and Richie's mom, where it's very clear that Richie's dad has a problem with Virgil because of the color of his skin. And he's not happy that his son is friends with Virgil, that he's brought Virgil into the house. This all culminates with the Metabreed ends up attacking and kidnapping Richie with the help of Carmandillo, is also involved with this episode. Our boy is back to break up some of the tension here. Along with Champus, who's in this episode as well. But ultimately, this leads to Richie getting kidnapped. They have him, and it leads to this sort of uneasy alliance, at least on the side of Richie's dad, with Robert Hawkins to try and save and find Richie. So they're able to work together and with the help of Static, of course, overcome the Metabreed once they get to the hideout. And later on, we see that Richie's dad ends up going to the community center so that he can thank the boys or thank Mr. Hawkins, and he even takes them together to the local comic convention there that's at the community center. So it seems like by the end of this episode, we see that Mr. Foley has, at least in some part, grown a little bit. It's not completely healed. There seems to still be some prejudice there, obviously. But yeah, this is, as we mentioned, Static was not afraid to, where they could, touch on some of these real serious real life things. And this is, boy, this is talk about going for broke. Like, this is a big one to tackle as your first commentary episode, I'd say. Like, we have a gun episode later on. We have one with people experiencing homelessness later on in the next season. But this one is the first one, and this is a huge one, obviously based on the fact that we're dealing with a young black teenager that is our protagonist.
Yeah, I think it is. Unfortunately, I do think it's something, especially for kids, to be aware of. It isn't always, the cartoonish person wearing a white sheet. Like, you don't always get to, unfortunately, label people who have that type of bigotry in their hearts so clearly. So when Virgil is struck by it, by his best friend, and you kind of see the situation it's put Richie in and how uncomfortable he is with the idea of Virgil even coming over to hang out at his place, and the sort of strain that it's clearly put on Richie's parents' marriage and all of these things. It really does have a lot of depth to it that I think we can all maybe appreciate more as adults than we could have as children. But yeah, just to be aware of, that's unfortunately a scenario that is all too common, and hopefully less common now than it was 20 years ago when that episode aired, but still something that folks will have to deal with, and to see it played out that way, of the father of your best friend treating you like that is so dramatic. And there's this great moment for Robert, sort of, as after Richie's captured by Eban, and the two dads are off looking for their sons, where Robert kind of just lays into him and talks about the adversity he's faced in his life, and how guys like Richie's dad are kind of a dime a dozen that he's had to come up against over and over again in his career, and how clearly thank God your son's not like you, sort of thing. And there is this moment where, especially once he sees a black superhero save his son's life, where he does kind of have this epiphany, and he does sort of vow to change his ways, which is lovely. A little bit of escapism. Unfortunately, as we say, the real world often is not that clean cut, but it is a nice episode, and it does tackles it head on. It's not inferred, it's not bandied about. It's very clear what this episode is, and what the point is. And I think it's done quite effectively, especially for a kids cartoon, to have it tackled that directly.
Yeah, this one we did not like, I think, as much. I think, if I recall, I think the fact that it kind of does get a little bow put on the end of it, and it isn't as realistic as perhaps as we would expect, when you're dealing with something like this. It did feel a little bit of like a, I don't know, not a cop out, but it's like just a little bit too. It's just a little bit too convenient at the end of the episode that, all through this, now Richie's dad is no longer a racist. Like, okay, I think that probably affected our scores a little bit. I think the animation, I think we had some trouble with that also in this episode. So I gave it a 20 out of 40. You gave it a 22 out of 40. So. It's a big swing. It's a big attempt at obviously a very, very serious topic, and a very important topic to discuss. Maybe that ending wasn't quite. It was a little too unbelievable, maybe, for a cartoon that's about a kid that is able to manipulate static electricity. But that being said, I still think I still think it would be one that we would recommend. At least for me, I would recommend it as, hey, if you're interested in seeing what Static is about, this is an episode that really that sets it apart from some of the other cartoons, especially at that time. But in the DCAU, like they're attacking a real life issue. If that's something that you're interested in, a way to address that with a younger child, this is probably the best way to do that, in my opinion, if you're gonna use a superhero show. From there, Liam, we will move on to our next episode, which we covered on episode 256 of the podcast, and that was Winds of Change. If I didn't mention it, Sons of the Fathers is episode 73, so way back there if you want to check that one out. But Winds of Change, episode 256 of the pod. We tackled this one, which aired December the 16th, 2000, and this is an interesting episode because the villain is just a big, large fella. He's an overweight dude that loves food, and he can blow air out of his stomach because he's so large or something like that. Heavy C is our villain for the week. He's our big bang baby of the week. But the real story that we get here, which this is the first of, from my recollection, a few different times that we see this storyline happen, but Virgil and Richie have a fight. They have an argument, and this causes them, at least in this case, to end their friendship. They decide they're going to go their separate ways, which seemingly, puts the guy in the chair that's been Static's #1 support system, who's designed all of his technology, including these new Zap Cap things that he's provided to him, takes that resource away from Static, but Static's too proud to admit that he needs him. They're both kind of, in their feelings, if you will, about certain things. So one of those things seems to be about Static's or Virgil's new interest in this new Daisy character that has come on the scene, and Richie may be a little jealous that he's spending more time with her versus and giving her more attention than he is spending time with him. So this leads to this rift in their friendship. As I said, they end their friendship. They decide they're going to go their different ways or their separate ways, and but then ultimately they're forced to come back together once that Heavy C has attacked, or Slipstream rather is his villain name. Slipstream ends up attacking Dakota. They're able to team up after Richie finds himself in danger, unable to use enough Zap Caps to defend himself. Static comes up with an idea. They end up working together. The Zap Caps recharge Static's powers after he's decharged, which we didn't know before this episode was a thing that could happen. But of course it happens at the worst possible time for Static. And ultimately, they team up and are able to defeat Slipstream. And then at the end, Daisy's happy that they're friends again, and Richie and Static are buddy again, and they're all talking about superheroes and doing secret handshakes and all that, much to Daisy's chagrin. So, yeah, as I mentioned, this is an episode that sets the precedent here that we're going to see several different times here, which is the little bit of, brothers got to fight sometimes, and that happens with Richie and Virgil several times in this series, this being the first instance of that, though.
Yeah, my main memory of reviewing this episode is just that we ended up talking about former SNL and Monday Night Football commentator Dennis Miller for like 5 minutes, because I think there's a gag where they're in a comic store and they name I believe they name like a comic book creator, Dennis Miller, obviously naming after Dennis. Yeah, Denny O'Neil and Frank Miller, a little shout out to some legendary creators, but that just led to us doing like 3.5 minutes talking about SNL comedian Dennis Miller for some reason. So the fact that that's my defining memory of this episode tells me it's not a great one, but it led to a funny riff that I still think about sometimes. So that's something.
Well, the Dennis Miller of it all must have been what really made us love the episode, because we both gave it a 27 out of 40. I think maybe we liked the tension that it created and the idea that they had this problem that they had to solve separately, but ultimately figured out they're better together, they're better as a team. The Zap Caps recharging Static, coming up with a strategy to figure out how that happened. Even though I don't think we had experienced a quote unquote power outage from Static. Doesn't he I think he gets wet in the episode, which is why he loses his powers. And then we're like, oh,
I
why?
believe so, yes.
Since when is that a thing? Does that mean he can't go out in the rain? Like, I feel like
Can't take a shower.
right, right. What are we doing here? But yes, it didn't affect our scores that much because we were still in the high 20s there with 27 out of 40 for that episode. But that will take us to our next episode, Liam, which we reviewed on episode 162 of the podcast. And that is the episode Bent Out of Shape. So this involves the returning Rubber Band Man to the scene. And but he's in disguise this time, and as we mentioned in his first appearance in They're Playing My Song, he was of course a rapper who was not being given credit for his skills. So here he has to go undercover or in disguise as a different type of or as a different man altogether. And he's a rapper. Wouldn't you know it? And not only is this rapper popular and gaining popularity with the Dakota citizens, but he's also very popular with Sharon, as we find out that they're dating. Of course, this all comes to a head when the big reveal is that whoopsie, he's actually Rubber Band Man, and he's up to no good. Puff and Onyx are also show up at one point, and they're a part of the melee. And then ultimately, this leads to a big fight between Static and Rubber Band Man, with Sharon in the middle. It's unfortunate for Mr. Rubber Band Man in this case, but Static and Rubber Band Man, I believe, do kind of team up a little bit towards the end to help take down Puff and Onyx. So that does show us a little bit here that Rubber Band Man may be turning the corner here, even though he's not quite ready to be completely honest about who he is or what he is. But we do see that Rubber Band Man gets sent to prison at the end of the episode, but that he's likely to get out for good behavior if he continues on this pathway. So we get a little bit of the redemption story arc here for Rubber Band Man, who doesn't get off scot-free. He does have to pay for his crimes, but we do see that his turn is coming here, as we see, and Sharon is still very much attracted to him even through the end of the episode. So there's that romance between Sharon and Rubber Band Man and Adam, as he's better known. So yeah, or Stringer, as his rap name is in this episode. So, yeah, this is an episode that, as you put it, involves a lot of punching and kicking, and unfortunately does not look very good from my recollection, which is likely why our points took a huge dip from where we had been riding thus far with this season. I gave it a 19 out of 40. You gave it an 18 out of 40. So big dip in our scores there. The first one to hit below 20 since the first episode. So yeah, that says a lot about this episode kind of being a stinker.
Yes, we had the rare, slightly offbeat productions and top draw animation, who I think mostly worked on some of the Disney cartoons of that era, but got a couple episodes of Static here. It's just a very off model episode, and then yeah, you take into account that, and also just kind of the not exactly creative plot with it ended up just being a big fisticuffs at the end there. But yeah, not exactly a home run. And but to your point, even in this kind of rough outing, it does start. It takes us towards bigger and better things with the beginning of the idea of maybe a little redemption for Rubber Band Man. So all is not lost, even though it was definitely not a good episode in and of itself.
All right, and we are in our final 3 of the season here, Liam. We're wrapping things up here. So episode 161 of the podcast, we reviewed the episode Junior, which debuted on February the 10th, 2001. And this one is a very Alva-centered episode. And it's not just Edwin in this case, or Edwin Sr. We learn that Edwin Jr. is hanging around. And we kick off the episode by him kind of putting his foot in his mouth and being verbally he verbally insults his dad and some of the legal trouble that he's been in, all on live television, which leads to Edwin Sr. and Edwin Jr. getting into a big argument. Edwin Jr. storms off and ends up getting exposed to the Bang Baby gas, of course, and now he himself is a Bang Baby. So he renames himself Omnifarious at this point, and he and Static have quite the battles. Of course, what else would you name yourself? But Omnifarious and him battle throughout the episode. We really get a couple things here. We get Edwin Jr.'s daddy issues get worked out a little bit here. We get another entry into the terrible dads of the DCAU with Edwin Alva cementing his place, pun intended here, as ultimately by the end of the episode, the Omnifarious's powers are unfortunately turned on himself, and he turns himself into stone, much to the dismay of Edwin Sr. And this is a plot line that follows through all the way. We get crumbs of this all the way to the end of season 4. So this is kind of a linchpin episode here for this episode, as Edwin is sad and frustrated, doesn't know what to do. He blames Static in some ways for his son's transformation and the loss of his son. But it's at this point that this sets Edwin Sr. out on this desire and insatiable journey to find a cure for his son being frozen here in this state, which will lead to some episodes, obviously, some big episodes later down the road here. But you and I, as far as the scores for this episode, Liam, gave this one a 29 out of 40 from me and a 31 out of 40 from you. So we bounce back from that previous episode here. This one, we start again to get some of that through line threads of this storyline. I think the inter-family drama that we get between the Alvas is really good here. We do get to see some of the human side also. The weird thing to say for the big bad for the majority of this series, but Alva is no longer just this kind of mean, evil figurehead of this company. He also has a son. He's also a dad, a bad dad at that. But like we do it, in some ways, it does weirdly humanize him in this way, where he has this desire to have a better relationship with his son, sort of, but because it's negatively impacting his public persona, so to speak. But ultimately, at the end of this episode, he realizes the destruction that he's caused, although he ends up blaming Static ultimately for it. So we get some bits here where it's like you can almost relate to Alva, or you almost see these human parts of him, but it's just obviously twisted and so blinded by his hunger for power and his natural evil that it's just kind of it's done very well, I feel like, for the big bad of these seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It puts Static in an interesting perspective, where he has to sort of, once Edwin Jr. decides the best way to get his father's attention is to destroy his own companies, it kind of puts them into conflict and puts Static in a position where he almost has to defend Edwin Sr. despite his distaste for the man. From his son, who's just lost it and is exposing himself to all of these different types of Bang Baby gas, giving him all these different powers, before ultimately, as you said, being turned to stone by his overdose on it, so to speak. It's a really interesting episode, and it does again, like it in a weird way, it does humanize the Edwin Alva character, who had just kind of been this nefarious puppet master, evil businessman up to this point in the series. So it gives him a little bit more depth and a reason to continue to wind up in Static's crosshairs over the rest of the series.
Absolutely. So we're down to our penultimate episode for season 1 here. That's the episode Replay, which we covered on episode 211 of the podcast and originally debuted on March the 3rd, 2001. This is an episode where we're introduced to a former child TV star from a imaginary show called Johnny on the Spot, a guy named Johnny Morrow, who is recognized at the Dakota Mall, and he's a bit down on his luck. He's no longer the hot TV commodity that he once was. He used to be this kind of celebrated national child heartthrob, but unfortunately, he's now kind of turned off by that, of course, as many child stars end up being. We then have this interaction that occurs as things begin being stolen at the mall, and we see Johnny can actually make himself replicate into different energy identities. Like there's other energy copies of himself that he can use as sort of soldiers to help him steal. This unfortunately takes a dark turn, though. It's not just crime that's happening in Dakota, as we soon realize that he's framing Static for thefts in and around the city. We see that the chief of police gets involved, and they're going to create a task force that stops Static. Of course, the police has to create some sort of task force to stop the hero that has done everything but to stop crime in the city. So Static investigates, obviously realizing that this is Johnny's doing, since he realized that he can clone himself and likely is the person responsible for the Static clones. He finds a Static clone's jacket in Johnny's apartment, of course, that happens to have a shock box also in the pocket. He uses this to spy on Johnny and gets his plans, realizing that he's going to seek revenge on the television studio that he was once a part of. This allows Richie and Static to team up to use the television broadcast to expose Johnny and show that he was the one behind Static's framing and all of that. So ultimately, he is foiled by this plan. And we had a little bit of tension here because, get this, stop me if you've heard this, but Richie didn't believe that Virgil wasn't the one that was committing the crimes. He thought that Virgil had turned bad, and this caused some friction in their relationship. But ultimately, they patch things up here at the end. All is well. Feelings are no longer hurt. Static is exonerated from his crimes, and Johnny goes to jail. So I have no recollection of us. Like some of these episodes, they stand out and I remember them. I have no recollection of reviewing this episode, despite, this only being 170 episodes ago, 180 episodes ago. But I gave it a 28 out of 40. You gave it a 29 out of 40, Liam. So we're hanging around the better, almost good. Like I would say like a C plus area there for our scores.
Yeah, I think we definitely settled in with what the season 1 episodes were at that point, and maybe we're able to judge them a little bit more fairly by that point. But yeah, the thing I remember about this episode mostly is that playing our aging child star is Neil Patrick Harris, who, of course, in real life was himself the star of Doogie Howser, MD. Eventually, of course, Neil Patrick Harris would find a great second life on a sitcom, How I Met Your Mother, and plenty of Broadway and other stage work as well. But I think so casting a former child star as this evil, nefarious child star, sort of grasping at the spotlight, is kind of a fun gag. And I guess every show's got to do the evil twin episode at some point. So this is Static's influence in that field. You got to do the evil twin episode, and everybody's convinced that Static's bad guy now. So It's a classic TV trope, even if it's a little bit old hat. Other than, like I said, kind of maybe the fun of static versus static fights, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I had no recollection in revisiting that one for this episode. I was like, I no do not remember reviewing this. But yeah, it's fun. The Neil Patrick Harris involvement is certainly a fun bit of casting there by Andrea Romano for this episode. And Liam, that'll bring us to our final episode of the first season of Static, which is the episode Tantrum, which feels like a weird one to end on, but it was aired on May the 12th, 2001, in the 13th and final episode of season one. We reviewed this on episode 163 of the podcast, and the villain of this episode is the Hulk if he was purple and had red hair. That's what I remember about this episode. But no, this episode actually, I think this episode is probably more memorable because we get to see the first sort of struggle that Static has with losing his mother and kind of dealing with the loss of his mom and how he's processed it or how he's not processed it. We see him trying to, watching videotapes and trying to remember things, but then maybe getting a little bit too emotional for things. There's a memorial service that they're doing for Static's mom, Jean, later on, but Virgil just can't bring himself to want to be a part of it because it's just too hard for him. So then this is all kind of derailed and put on the back burner as Static realizes that there's a big purple monster, a Hulk, if you will, that's attacking the Dakota High School. And in and around there, we learn later on that there's this character who is one of the students at Dakota High School, Thomas Kim, who is being unfortunately I think I remember something important about this episode is this is an unfortunate stereotype that's used in this episode because our antagonist is a young Asian boy whose parents are overbearing about his academic success, and this turns him into this purple hulking monster as a result of the exposure, of course, to the Bang Baby gas. And this causes him to become this raging monster because his dad is upset that he got a 99% and not 100% on the test. So this causes him to have this rampage. Static and him ultimately, Static's able to foil him, of course, and then that's kind of not dealt with anymore. We don't see him anymore. We bring what was put on the back burner to the forefront, which is more of Virgil dealing with his mom's passing. He's able to kind of use some of the advice that his mom gave him about tantrums specifically, and that helps him to lure the purple hulking beast tantrum away to this amusement park. That way he doesn't do damage to things that matter, I guess, as much. And then this causes Thomas to turn back into a real boy instead of this big purple monster. So the moral of the story is his parents have to be nicer to him or he'll turn into this big purple monster, I guess. But we do get a nice little bow with Virgil coming to grips with kind of the memory of his mom and being able to balance and process some of the feelings that he has in losing his mom and still be able to celebrate who she was when she was alive. So that memory that he has of her sharing like how to deal with tantrums leads to this really cool moment where he ultimately decides that he's going to take part in this memorial service for her with his family so that he can grieve her properly. And that ultimately her spirit is there, with him regardless of whether or not he feels her there or not, which is a nice sentiment. So we do end on a little bit of a sentimental note here, but it is a little bit soured by this Asian stereotype, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that was almost our review at the time. Like we if I remember correctly, we so loved the framing device of Virgil kind of narrating the episode and sort of recounting the story at his mother's grave, and sort of working through his own grief and fear and issues with with his mother losing her life so young, and then him also seeing the stress that Thomas is going through. But yeah, there is that part where it's just it's the very stereotypical helicopter parent, especially I feel like in it's often portrayed that way, specifically as you said with Asian children, especially in America, that they're expected to be these perfect militant almost students. So that part's not so fun, and also just because at the end of the day, it's a weird Hulk ripoff. Like it's a purple Hulk with orange hair, as you said, and that's kind of silly and ridiculous. But it's all sort of wrapped up in these anecdotes of Virgil sort of working through his own grief with the passing of his mother. So that part of it's great. It's just unfortunately married with kind of a very silly kind of one note villain of the piece, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So yeah, our scores though, despite us maybe having a little bit of twinge of uncomfortability with that storyline there, it didn't affect our scores too badly. We both gave it a 28 out of 40, so our first unanimous score in all 13 of those episodes there. But yeah, I think that brings us here really to the end of season one, Liam. I think if you had to pick one episode,
Mm-hmm.
that you would recommend to somebody? I think it's hard not to pick the pilot because obviously that gives our
Yeah.
hero's origin. So let's make it a little bit harder on us. If you had to pick one episode that you were to recommend to somebody, say, hey, this is if you're going to check out any episode other than the pilot in season one, this is the episode that I'm going to recommend, just for either the impact of the episode, the story, or a combination of everything. Like because we gave it a high score, which one would
Mm-hmm.
you pick?
Yeah, I think I would go for they're playing my song. I just think Rubber Band Man's such a fun character,
Hmm.
and introducing him the way they do, where it's this sort of music industry feud that turns into a supervillain feud is a lot of fun. And like we were talking about, it just gives it's kind of our first villain that I feel like really has a bit more depth to him, even though there's cooler villains you could argue like an Ebon or somebody that are already introduced by this point. I think that they're playing my song probably stands out for me. What about you?
I think I just for a difference of opinion, I don't disagree with that one, but just to be different, I guess I'll say Junior, just because it does play such a important role in so many of the later episodes of this series. It does have this dynamic that shows the motivation or gives them more of a motivation, albeit one that's
Mm-hmm.
clearly misplaced from Alva Senior, but he has this motive for revenge against Static, blaming him for his son's troubles and not willing to look in the mirror at his own responsibility for it. So I think that it just gives it another dimension to that character, and then ultimately, obviously, it's a big motivation for him seeking revenge as well as kind of in the background looking for this cure to free his son from this prison made of stone here. So I think I'd have to go with Junior for that one.
All right, and Cal, I think to wrap up, then just for a little bit of fun, we try not to be too negative, but sometimes it's fun to be with some of these episodes. We'll just pick one if we could, as we like to occasionally jokingly say for an episode we really didn't care for. Strike it from DCAU canon forever. Is there an episode in season one of Static Shock that you would prefer not to have to discuss ever again, even in passing?
Boy, that's hard. I feel like I almost have to give it to Bent Out of Shape because we didn't like that episode so much.
Yeah,
But at the
it's
same
an ugly
time,
looking episode.
yeah, it doesn't look good, but the story is important because it obviously sets up the romance
Mhm.
between Adam and Sharon for the rest of the series. So I don't know if that's one that I could necessarily count on for that. So I guess The next lowest score that isn't the pilot, because we're not going to scrap the pilot. Uh, Boy, this is hard. I guess, I guess I'd have to pick one of the ones that I didn't really remember very much, which is either Child's Play or Replay. I guess I think those by default kind of fit into that category because in doing the review here, like I remember bits and pieces of almost everything else here that we've talked about today. Those ones just felt like a complete blank. Yeah. But once we got into talking about Child's Play, I do remember like the action figure, bringing the action figure to life, and the cherry soda in the
Mhm.
fountain and the snowing ice cream. Like I do remember that. So I guess I'm gonna have to say sorry to television's Neil Patrick Harris, but replay's gonna go in the toilet for me. What about you?
Yeah, I was kind of in a similar mindset. It's probably one of the ones I forgot existed, and yeah, I would probably go Child's Play just because maybe I think the I don't hate that episode by any means, but maybe just I thought the powers are so like magic compared to some of the other metahumans or bang babies that we get in the series. Not that it's any less preposterous to be like able to control the wind like you know what? Maybe I'll get rid of that one. I'll get rid of Winds of Change because that one's just quite silly. And I think the argument between Virgil and Richie, maybe in retrospect, maybe I liked it at the time, but I just remember it being like at this point, Richie doesn't have superpowers and he keeps trying to get involved in metahuman fights. And I'm like, Richie, you're just a boy. Go home. But so maybe I would go Winds of Change. But at least that, like you said, that is another sitcom television trope, right? You gotta have friction between the best friends at least once a season, especially in a show that takes place in high school. So yeah, maybe I'll just stick with Child's Play as my answer. But yeah, I don't think there's anything universally awful. Certainly, it's not. None of these episodes are the worst episode of Static Shock. That
Hmm.
is unfortunately a designation left solely for Hoop Squad, which we will get to someday, perhaps in our next in a few omnibuses down the road. But thank you everybody for listening this week as we went down memory lane, recapping the entire first season. As we talked about, this is kind of a sort of a companion to our character spotlight episodes that we do, but since unfortunately there is precious little Static Shock the cartoon merchandise and no comic books really, at least that tied directly into the cartoon, it's a little bit harder to find static characters that can fit a character spotlight. So this was hopefully a fun addendum to that. As Cal said, if you've got ideas on how on what you'd like to see get the omnibus treatment next. I like Cal's idea about specific storylines being perhaps adapted into this format. I think that would be a lot of fun as well. Give us a shout. The best way to get in touch and influence our decision making, as Cal said, is to head to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. You can become a monthly donator, as mentioned, and you can even ask questions on the show, get you read out on the air. We always appreciate those folks. Another monetary way to support us is, of course, to head to the store. That's in the notes of this very episode. You can find a link to our store. Pick yourself up a sticker or a mug or a hat or something that helps us out. And of course, there's all the free ways to support us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed on whatever podcast app you have. And if it lets you rate us, make sure you're giving us 5 stars. Apple Podcasts lets you leave reviews. So if you can leave us a review, we would appreciate that. That helps bump us up in the search algorithms. And if you leave a 5 star review, we'll even give you a little shout. We also are trying to interact more with our Spotify comments as well. So, and of course, you can always follow us on the socials at DCAU Review everywhere. And boy, I'm tired. We got a lot of plugs to get through. But yes, as we head towards the last week of March, Cal, I think it's time to discuss what we'll be reviewing. And Cal, as we look towards next week, though it is technically still the final Saturday in March, it's also the final Saturday before April Fool's Day. And every year on the show, we've created something of a tradition. And so that means it's time for a very different review coming up next week.
This is always one of my favorite episodes each and every single year. So in the past, we've done Marvel cartoons. We've done Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles most recently. We've done a lot of Marvel cartoons. This year, we put it in the hands of the fans to decide what would you like to see. We put up a nice little poll on our social media at DCAU Review on Twitter X. And wouldn't you know, the show that won, a super teen extraordinaire who runs around in underwear. That's right, it's Freakazoid! Yes, a little cartoon from that debuted around the same time as Batman the Animated Series. Famously, Bruce Timm also involved with that. I think Paul Dini also involved with that. Lots of DCAU names you might recognize here. But we're gonna look at the pilot episode of Freakazoid next week for our April Fool's episode. Maybe the one and only time we review Freakazoid. Who knows? A Steven Spielberg production, Freakazoid, episode 1, Dance of Doom. Next week on the podcast, Liam. Looking forward to this one. Have not seen Freakazoid in many, many, many years. This one's going to be a different one for sure, but certainly memorable for a lot of reasons here as we take a look at this classic and often forgotten, but probably cult classic at this point, cartoon from our childhood.
Absolutely. Can't wait to talk about Freakazoid. Definitely not the one I thought we'd be talking about. We can talk about this now because we're not having to do it. There was like a 5-part April Fool's month on the table, depending on what one. So this is definitely a little less work for us. So we're not complaining in that regards. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. As you said, there will be some definitely still some DCAU influence on the show with some of the people involved at various points in the production. And as mentioned, the April Fool's episode, always a lot of fun. The one week of the year that we get completely outside of DC animation as a whole and head into a complete other universe. Going to be a lot of fun. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you next week on the special Freakazoid edition of the DCAU Review.
Adios, people.